I used to believe control was a language the world understood without translation. Boardrooms, contracts, deadlines, numbers that bent people's wills. Then one night, metal screamed, glass shattered, and my body betrayed me in ways no balance sheet could explain. I woke up to silence, fluorescent lights, and the humiliating truth that I could not stand. The chair waited beside my bed like a sentence I hadn't agreed to. They told me recovery would take time, months, maybe longer. They said the word temporary as if it softened anything. I heard dependent. I heard exposed. I signed paperwork with a shaking hand and approved the hiring of a private nurse without looking at the name too closely. At that point, she was just another service, another line item, another solution I could still afford. Her name was Evelyn Brooks. She arrived on a gray morning, rain streaking the windows of my Manhattan apartment, city traffic humming below like a reminder that life was still moving without me. She didn't rush, didn't hover. She spoke calmly, efficiently, as if my vulnerability didn't intimidate her. When she positioned the wheelchair in front of me, our eyes met, and something quiet shifted in the room. Dependence changes the way you notice things, the way hands linger when adjusting footrests, the warmth of someone standing too close while helping you transfer, the sound of her breathing when she leaned in, steady and controlled, while mine wasn't. I hated how much my body reacted before my pride could intervene. Hated and feared how aware I became of her presence. This was supposed to be clinical, professional, contained by signatures and boundaries. But every day, the space between care and intimacy narrowed, and I felt something unfamiliar taking shape. Something that didn't belong to either of us, and certainly wasn't covered by the contract. If you're ready to follow this story, subscribe to the channel and comment the city you're watching from. I learned quickly that mornings were the hardest. Not because of pain. Pain had structure, rules, but because of routine. I woke before the city did, listening to Manhattan stretch awake through distant sirens and delivery trucks. Light crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, illuminating the chair parked beside my bed. It waited patiently, indifferent to my pride. Every morning began with the same calculation. How long before she arrived, and how much of myself I would need to surrender before noon. Evelyn was punctual, always. At exactly 8, the doorbell chimed, followed by her soft knock, as if she understood that loudness had no place in my current life. She never entered like she owned the space, but she didn't hesitate either. Confident, grounded. She smelled faintly of soap and something herbal, clean without being sterile. "Good morning, Claire," she said, like it mattered that the morning was good. I hated how much I looked forward to hearing my name in her voice. The first transfer of the day was always the most intimate. She explained each step calmly, professionally, even though by now we both knew the routine. Hands at my waist, her knee braced gently against mine. "On 3, she'd say, and my body would obey her timing, not mine. For someone who'd built an empire on command, trusting another woman to hold my weight felt obscene, necessary, terrifying. Her grip was firm but careful, like she understood restraint as a form of respect. Once settled into the wheelchair, she adjusted the footrests, fingers brushing my ankles briefly, deliberately. I watched her from above, noticing details I never allowed myself to linger on, how her hair was usually tied low at the nape of her neck, how her jaw tightened slightly when she concentrated. She never rushed, never fumbled. The steadiness of her presence made it impossible to pretend this was just a transaction. Rehabilitation followed a strict schedule. Physical therapy twice a day, exercises that left my muscles trembling and my patience shredded. Evelyn counted repetitions softly, encouraging without coddling. When my arms gave out, she didn't rush to rescue me, she waited. "You've got it," she said once, and the words landed heavier than praise ever had in a boardroom. I pushed through because I didn't want to disappoint her, and the realization unsettled me. Outside, the city was unkindly beautiful. Rain came and went, washing the sidewalks clean before replacing itself with heat. From my apartment, I watched people hurry through crosswalks, umbrellas colliding, lives uninterrupted. Evelyn noticed when my gaze lingered too long. "We'll get you back out there," she said one afternoon, not promising when, only that. The certainty in her voice felt intimate in its own way. Meals became another quiet negotiation. She prepared them efficiently, adjusting plates to my reach without comment. Occasionally, she'd sit across from me, reviewing notes while I ate. The domesticity of it, 2 women sharing a table, sunlight pooling between us, felt dangerously normal. Sometimes our eyes met without intention, and neither of us looked away immediately. Those moments stretched, elastic and charged, before snapping back into professionalism. I noticed the discipline it took for her to remain composed, the way she stepped back once I was settled. The deliberate space she kept between us afterward. It was control, yes, but not dominance. It was restraint. And I recognized it, because I practiced a version of it my entire adult life. That recognition felt like a mirror I hadn't expected to face. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, my hands shook as I tried to remove my jacket. Frustration rose fast, hot, and humiliating. Without a word, Evelyn knelt in front of me and helped, fingers slow, precise. Our proximity was unavoidable. I could feel her warmth, her breath steady against my skin. For a second too long, neither of us moved. Then she stepped back, professional mask intact. The air felt thinner after she did. That night, alone again, I replayed the moment with uncomfortable clarity. Not because anything improper had happened, but because something had. Awareness. Want. The quiet understanding that dependence had opened a door I didn't know existed. I told myself it was temporary. That recovery would end this strange suspension of reality. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just about learning to walk again. By the second week, my body had learned Evelyn's rhythm better than my own. I knew when she would pause before speaking, when she would adjust her stance before lifting, when she would wait instead of rushing me. Dependence rewires perception. You start noticing patterns not because you want to, but because your safety depends on them. And somewhere between muscle memory and quiet mornings, she stopped feeling like an external presence and started feeling integrated. The weather shifted, as it often does in early fall. Rain gave way to sharp blue mornings, the kind that make the city look deceptively clean. Evelyn opened the windows while I brushed my teeth, letting in the sound of traffic and distant construction. "It helps with orientation," she said. "Fresh air, sense of normalcy." I nodded, pretending I wasn't grateful, pretending I hadn't missed the smell of the street. Transfers grew smoother, less instruction, more instinct. She no longer counted aloud unless I needed it. Sometimes her hand stayed at my waist an extra second after I was stable, as if confirming something only she could feel. I told myself it was clinical, balance assessment, risk management. But my body responded before logic could intervene. Breath hitching, shoulders tightening, awareness sharpening in ways I didn't invite. Physical therapy pushed harder that week. The therapist was kind but relentless, and by the time sessions ended, my muscles burned with a dull insistence that followed me back upstairs. Evelyn stayed close during cool-downs, offering water, adjusting supports, kneeling in front of me to stretch my calves. Her touch was efficient, practiced, yet I found myself tracking it, the pressure of her thumbs, the way she avoided unnecessary contact, and somehow made even that avoidance feel intentional. One afternoon, the therapist ran late. Evelyn and I waited alone in the rehab room, the air thick with antiseptic and the hum of fluorescent lights. I shifted uncomfortably, frustrated by the delay. She noticed immediately. "Do you want to practice transfers again?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. Anything to feel useful. She positioned the wheelchair, locked the brakes, stepped close. "Same as always," she said. But when I leaned forward, my foot slipped slightly. Instinct took over, her arms around my torso, pulling me back before I could fall. For a heartbeat, I was pressed against her, weight fully supported, breath uneven. I smelled soap, heat, something unmistakably human. She held me just long enough to be sure I was steady, then released me with controlled precision. "I've got you," she said quietly, as if correcting a thought rather than a movement. The words stayed with me longer than they should have. Back at the apartment, silence settled differently. We moved around each other with practiced familiarity, she preparing notes, me reviewing emails I barely engaged with. At one point, I caught her watching me, not assessing posture or circulation, but simply looking. When she realized I'd noticed, she looked away immediately, professionalism snapping back into place. The moment felt like a line drawn, not crossed, but acknowledged. That night, pain kept me awake. Not sharp, just persistent, deep in my hips and lower spine. When I finally admitted defeat and pressed the call button, Evelyn came without a trace of irritation. She adjusted my position, checked circulation, spoke softly. "You're pushing hard," she said. Not a reprimand, an observation. Her hands moved with confidence, but her voice stayed low, careful. "Do you ever get tired of this?" I asked suddenly. She paused. "Of caring for people?" "No," I said. "Of being close to them." She considered me for a moment longer than necessary. "Closeness isn't the problem," she said finally. "Confusion is." After she left the room, I lay staring at the ceiling, pulse unsteady. Confusion. The word felt accurate and insufficient at the same time, because nothing about what I felt was chaotic. It was precise, focused, narrowing. By the end of the week, something unspoken had settled between us. A shared awareness, not acted on, not named, just present, like a current beneath still water. I told myself it would pass once I stood on my own again. But standing, I was beginning to realize, wasn't the only thing I was relearning. The first time Evelyn wheeled me outside, it felt like stepping onto a stage in the wrong costume. The lobby of my building smelled like polished stone and expensive perfume, and the doorman's smile wavered, just a fraction, as his eyes flicked to the chair. I hated that I noticed. I hated even more that Evelyn noticed too, and positioned herself beside me in a way that made the moment feel less like exposure and more like shielding. Outside, the city hit me with its usual impatience. Horns, footsteps, wind that cut between skyscrapers like it had a schedule. Evelyn adjusted the blanket over my knees with brisk competence, then crouched to check the wheel locks. "You tell me if anything feels off," she said. Her voice was normal, professional. But her hand brushed my shin as she stood, and my skin sparked like it had been waiting for permission. We went 2 blocks, then 3. I tried to act like this was casual, like I hadn't spent years moving through Manhattan as if it belonged to me. Now the sidewalk seemed uneven, unpredictable. People swerved around us without apology. One man muttered, annoyed, when he had to step off the curb. I clenched my jaw. Evelyn didn't. She simply guided the chair forward, steady as a metronome, and when I tensed, she leaned in slightly and said, "Eyes up, breathe." It was a command, gentle and absolute, and my body obeyed. At a small cafe near my office, she asked if I wanted to go in. I said no too quickly, then corrected myself with a forced calm. "Yes," I said, "just yes." Inside, the air smelled like espresso and warm sugar. A barista glanced at the chair, then at my face, and quickly looked away. Evelyn ordered for us without making it a thing. 2 coffees, 1 decaf. She remembered. That detail landed somewhere deeper than it had any right to. We sat at a corner table by the window. My chair fit awkwardly, and I hated the way it made me feel like a disruption. Evelyn shifted the table slightly, making space without fuss, then sat across from me with her shoulders relaxed. For a minute, we didn't speak. The city moved on outside, people laughing, phones pressed to ears, lives rolling forward. Evelyn watched me with a quiet patience that felt like pressure. "You miss it," she said finally. "What?" I asked, though I knew. "The speed, the power." She held my gaze. "The illusion that you never need anyone." I should have shut it down. I should have redirected the conversation back to therapy goals and medication times. Instead, I felt my throat tighten, a surprising heat behind my eyes. "I hate this," I admitted. "Not the chair, the being seen like this." Evelyn's expression softened, but she didn't pity me. "Then let's change what you can control," she said. "How you hold yourself, how you speak to yourself," she paused, "and how you let people help you." The words should have felt like a lecture. They didn't. They felt like an invitation. Back at the apartment, my phone rang with a call I'd been avoiding. Gavin Mercer, my CFO, crisp and insistent. "Claire, the board wants a progress update," he said, not bothering with concern. "They're nervous about the timeline, about your visibility." My stomach turned. "I'm still running the company," I said, keeping my voice steady. "From your couch," he replied, too casually. "Optics matter." After I ended the call, my hands trembled. Anger, humiliation, fear, stacked neatly like files I couldn't close. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, having heard just enough. "Board call?" she asked. "I'm not fragile," I snapped, then regretted it immediately. Evelyn didn't flinch. "I know," she said, "but you're tired." "I can handle tired. Claire." She said my name like a hand on my shoulder. Handling isn't the same as healing. The room went very still. I looked up at her. She was standing close enough that I could see the faint freckles across her nose, the small crease between her brows when she worried. She hadn't crossed a line. She was just there. But my body read it as intimacy anyway. The air felt warm, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "I don't want them to smell weakness," I said. Quieter. Evelyn's gaze didn't move. "Then don't give them weakness," she said. "Give them truth." Recovery is not collapse. Something in my chest loosened. The urge to reach for her, physically, instinctively, rose so fast it startled me. I didn't move. I couldn't, not without making the invisible line visible. Evelyn seemed to sense it. She stepped back half a pace, just enough to restore distance, but not enough to break the tension. "We can rehearse what you'll say," she offered, voice even. "If you want." I nodded, grateful and unsettled, because what I wanted wasn't rehearsal. It was relief. It was the steadiness of her hands, the calm in her voice, the way she made my dependence feel like something other than shame. That night after she left, I replayed the moment in the living room over and over. The closeness, the pause, the way she stepped back like she was protecting both of us. I told myself she was just being professional. But professionals didn't look at you like that. And they didn't feel like the only thing keeping you from falling. Again. The conversation Evelyn asked for didn't happen right away. It hovered between us for 2 days, unspoken but present, shaping every movement. We became more careful and somehow more aware. She narrated her actions with extra precision. I pretended not to notice how often my attention followed her anyway. The apartment felt smaller, like the walls were listening for whatever we refused to say. On the third morning, my physical therapist canceled last minute, a scheduling error. One sentence in an email, casually disruptive. The routine I relied on cracked, and with it my composure. Evelyn read the message over my shoulder and said nothing at first. She made tea, adjusted my chair, grounded the moment before addressing it. "We can still do light work," she said. "Only if you want to." I did. Not because of progress, but because stopping felt like losing ground. She guided me through modified exercises in the living room, her voice steady, her presence constant. When my leg spasmed unexpectedly, pain shot sharp and hot. I gasped, fingers gripping the armrest. Evelyn was beside me instantly, one hand firm on my thigh, the other anchoring my knee. "Breathe," she said, low and close. I did, through clenched teeth, through the surge of sensation that wasn't only pain. It took longer than usual to pass. When it did, I realized how close she still was. Her hand hadn't moved, neither had mine, which now rested against her wrist without intention. We both noticed at the same time. She withdrew slowly, deliberately, as if sudden movement might break something fragile. My pulse didn't slow. "I should document that," she said, standing, professional, safe. But the room didn't reset. It held the imprint of what had almost happened. Not action, but awareness, the kind that changes how you sit with someone afterward. We finished the session quietly. I watched her write notes, the curve of her shoulder, the concentration in her expression. I wondered, not for the first time, how much of herself she was holding back. That afternoon, my sister called. She'd been supportive in the abstract. Texts, flowers, concern packaged neatly at a distance. Now she wanted specifics. "How are you really?" she asked. I looked at Evelyn across the room, felt the weight of the question press inward. "I'm learning how much help costs," I said finally. "Not financially." My sister paused, then changed the subject. Some things made people uncomfortable when named too clearly. Later, Evelyn helped me shower. It was efficient, practiced, respectful. She kept her eyes focused, her movements precise. Steam filled the bathroom, softening edges, blurring the mirror. When she handed me the towel, our fingers brushed, bare skin this time, warm and unmistakably human. The contact was brief. The effect wasn't. "I'm going to step out," she said immediately. Not hurried, controlled. I sat there afterward, water cooling on my skin, heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion. The contract didn't forbid touch. Touch was required. It just couldn't account for how intention shifts when familiarity deepens, for how care becomes personal when someone learns the map of your body through repetition. That evening, the talk finally came. We were in the kitchen. I was seated at the counter-height table. She stood across from me, hands loosely clasped. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And you don't owe me an answer right now." I nodded. "Do you feel dependent on me?" she asked, not accusatory, curious, careful. "Yes," I said. The honesty surprised us both. She inhaled slowly. "That's part of my role. But there's another kind of dependence that can form. Emotional. It happens easily in situations like this." She held my gaze. I need to know if you're aware of it. I am, I said. Then quieter. Are you? Her jaw tightened, just slightly. Yes. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with recognition. Two adults naming something without rushing to define it, without pretending it didn't exist. Outside, a siren passed, then faded. Life, indifferent and ongoing. We don't have to act on it, she said. I know. But we also don't have to pretend it isn't there. That landed deeper than any promise. Because pretending had always been my specialty. Control through omission, power through silence. I looked at her, really looked, and understood something that unsettled me more than desire ever could. What I felt wasn't born from weakness. It wasn't a byproduct of injury, it was clarity. The kind that comes when everything extraneous is stripped away, and what remains has no title, no clause, no protection. The contract covered care. It didn't cover choice. And for the first time since the accident, I felt something shift that had nothing to do with my legs, and everything to do with what I might be willing to risk once I could stand again. Progress came quietly, the way real change often does. A longer hold during transfers, a steadier core when I leaned forward. Less tremor, more trust. The physical therapist called it measurable improvement. I called it something else, proof that my body was listening again. Evelyn noticed before anyone else did. She always did. She didn't celebrate it loudly, just adjusted the plan, raised expectations, and met me where I was becoming instead of where I'd been. With progress came a new kind of tension. The closer I got to standing, the more fragile our equilibrium felt. Dependence had shaped us. Independence threatened to redraw the lines. Evelyn remained careful, scrupulous even. She narrated her touch. She stepped back sooner. She left doors open that used to be closed. It felt like watching someone you care about prepare for departure without admitting it out loud. One afternoon, during gait training, my knee buckled unexpectedly. Not a fall, just enough to throw me off. Evelyn reacted instantly, arms firm around my torso, her stance wide and practiced as she absorbed my weight. We stayed like that for a moment, my cheek near her shoulder, my breath uneven against her collarbone. The room went still. When she eased me back into the chair, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The contact had already said too much. Afterward, I sat in the quiet of the rehab room, frustration coiling tight in my chest. I was close, I said, anger sharp around the edges. Evelyn knelt in front of me, eyes level with mine. Close isn't the same as ready, she said gently. Then, softer, and it doesn't mean failure. Her words didn't soothe me, her presence did. That distinction mattered more than I liked. Back home, the city pressed in with late autumn impatience. Wind rattled the windows. The sky hung low and gray, threatening rain. Evelyn helped me settle near the window with a blanket, then moved to the kitchen. I watched her without pretense now. How she moved with purpose, how care lived in her body as much as her training. I realized I'd started measuring my days by her arrival and departure, the space she filled and the quiet she left behind. That night, the board sent another email, a subtle one, polite, suggestive. We're pleased with your progress. Let's discuss a phased return to public appearances. My chest tightened. Standing, literally and figuratively, was becoming a performance again. I showed Evelyn the message. She read it once, then looked up. What do you want? She asked. Not what they wanted, not what optics demanded, what I wanted. I want to be ready, I said. Not rushed. She nodded. Then we protect that. The simplicity of her loyalty startled me. No agenda, no leverage. Just care, offered without condition. It felt intimate in a way touch never had. It also felt dangerous, because it made me want to lean in when I should have been bracing myself to let go. 2 days later, she told me she'd requested a case review. Standard, she said, given your progress. I knew what it meant. A transition plan, reduced hours, eventual replacement. My stomach dropped in a way my body no longer could. You didn't have to, I said too quickly. She met my gaze, steady. I did, she replied. For you and for me. The words landed hard. For you and for me. Boundaries, finally given weight. I respected her more for it, and resented the inevitability all the same. That night, as she helped me prepare for bed, our movements were careful, restrained. When she finished, she didn't leave right away. She stood there, hands folded, eyes searching mine like she was memorizing something she might not get to see again. "I won't blur this," she said quietly. "Even if it hurts." I swallowed. "I won't ask you to." We held the moment without touching it, the way you hold a flame in your mind when you know your hands would burn. After she left, sleep came slow and fractured. I dreamed of standing, not upright, not triumphant, but balanced, steady, with nothing to prove. The next morning during training, I stood with support for a full count of 10. My legs shook, my core screamed, but I stayed. Evelyn watched from a careful distance, pride tempered with restraint. When I sat back down, breathless, she smiled. Small, real, professional. It felt like a victory and a goodbye folded into the same gesture. Standing wasn't the point anymore, choice was. And I was beginning to understand that recovery doesn't end when you can walk. It ends when you can decide what you're willing to risk once you can. The case review moved faster than I expected. Paperwork followed conversations, and conversations followed progress. And suddenly, the end had a date. Not an end. This one. Evelyn framed it professionally when she told me, voice even, posture neutral. 2 weeks, she said, then a gradual handoff. I nodded like I'd expected it, like I hadn't been measuring my days by her presence for months. Those 2 weeks stretched and compressed at the same time. Every session felt weighted, every success tinged with the awareness that she was teaching herself how to step away. She corrected less with touch, more with words. She left sooner. She arrived exactly on time instead of early. I told myself it was right. I told myself that what we'd done, what we were doing, was clean, ethical, contained. My body didn't listen. The city turned colder. Wind rattled the windows and sent papers skittering across my desk. One afternoon, snow flirted with the skyline, soft and indecisive. I stood for longer intervals now, supported by parallel bars, the chair waiting behind me like a patient witness. Evelyn watched from a measured distance, arms crossed loosely, pride visible but restrained. When I sat back down, she nodded once. That was strong, she said. Not celebratory. Honest. We talked more in those days, about ordinary things, her childhood in upstate New York. My first job out of grad school. The ways ambition narrows your life until you don't notice what it costs. We avoided naming the thing between us, but it shaped the conversations anyway. Like a gravity well, neither of us wanted to orbit too closely. When silence came, it wasn't awkward. It was careful. On the night before her last full shift, a storm rolled in hard. Rain lashed the windows, city lights smearing into long, trembling lines. My legs ached, the deep ache that came with progress and exhaustion. Evelyn helped me settle on the couch, then lingered. Longer than necessary, shorter than I wanted. You're ready, she said, not for walking, for what came after. I don't feel ready, I admitted. She met my gaze. Readiness isn't certainty, she said. It's consent. The word landed like a quiet bell. Consent to step forward, to risk, to choose without guarantees. I watched her hands, folded neatly, the discipline in her posture a kindness to both of us. I realized then that everything I felt was sharpened by the fact that she would not take advantage of my dependence. That restraint was the truest intimacy we'd shared. Her last day arrived clear and cold. The apartment felt echoing, already rearranging itself around her absence. She walked me through a final set of exercises, corrected my stance with words alone, then checked the schedule she'd prepared for the transition. When it was time, she stood near the door, bag in hand, expression composed. "This is where I step out," she said. I nodded, then surprised us both by saying, "When this role ends, if I reach out, after, would that be inappropriate?" She didn't answer immediately. She considered the question the way she considered everything, with care. "Not after," she said. "Not as your nurse." A pause. "As myself? We mean nothing if we don't choose freely." The door closed behind her with a sound that felt final and unfinished all at once. The weeks that followed were quieter. A new nurse came, competent and kind, but the rhythm was different. I walked more. I sat less. I returned to public meetings with a measured confidence that surprised the board and unsettled my CFO. I didn't explain the changes. I didn't need to. Strength, I'd learned, didn't require spectacle. On a bright morning in early spring, I stood at my window without support and watched the city wake up. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder I'd set for myself weeks earlier. Reassessment. Not of my body, of my courage. I opened my contacts, scrolled once, and stopped. Choice, after all, isn't about the absence of risk. It's about deciding which risk you're finally willing to carry. I waited 3 days after the reminder before I called her. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed to be sure that when I did, it would be me speaking, not the echo of recovery. I stood when I dialed, no chair nearby, feet planted on the hardwood floor like a quiet declaration. My hand didn't shake. That felt important. She answered on the third ring. "Evelyn Brooks," she said, instinctively professional. Then a pause. "Claire?" "Yes," I said. Hearing her name in my own voice again steadied me. "I wanted to ask if you'd like to get coffee. As ourselves." Another pause. Shorter this time. I imagined her considering context, consequence, the way she always did. "I would," she said, "if that's really what you want." "It is." We chose a cafe neither of us had been to, halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground. The city had softened into spring. Trees budding, sidewalks rinsed clean by recent rain. I arrived early and took a seat near the window, noticing how easily I moved now, how the room no longer rearranged itself around my presence. When she walked in, I recognized her instantly, and also noticed the difference. No scrubs, no badge. Jeans, a simple jacket, hair loose at her shoulders. She looked lighter, and so did I. We smiled, a little uncertain. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. It felt like a beginning, not a continuation. Conversation came easily at first. Updates, small laughter, the relief of speaking without the weight of duty. She asked about my gait, my schedule, then stopped herself with a self-aware smile. "Sorry," she said. "Old habits." "I don't mind," I said. "Just don't chart it." That made her laugh, really laugh, and something in my chest loosened. We talked about her next assignment, my return to the office, the strange quiet that follows a chapter closing before the next one announces itself. There was a moment, mid-sentence, when our eyes held a beat longer than necessary. No one looked away. No one rushed to fill the space. "I was careful with you," she said eventually, voice low. "I needed to be." "I know," I said. "That's why I trusted you." The truth settled between us, uncomplicated. Outside, the street hummed with afternoon life. Inside, the table felt like an island, two women meeting without roles to protect them. When I stood to leave, she watched me. Not with assessment offering, but with something warmer, something earned. We walked together for a block before pausing. No pressure, no expectation. The air smelled like rain and coffee grounds, and the faint sweetness of something blooming. "I'm glad you called," she said. "So am I." The next weeks unfolded carefully. Dinner once, a walk twice. Conversation that dipped into deeper water and came back up laughing. We learned each other without urgency, without the strange gravity of dependence. When I stumbled, only once on an uneven curb, she reached out instinctively, then stopped herself, offering her arm instead. I took it. Choice made visible. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the city darken into gold and blue, she asked, "Do you ever miss it? The chair?" I considered the question honestly. "I miss what it taught me," I said. "That needing help doesn't erase authority. That control isn't the same as strength." She nodded. "You don't confuse those anymore." "No," I said. "I don't." When we kissed, it was unhurried, not a release, an agreement. The city didn't pause. No music swelled. It was simple and exact and real. I felt balanced. Not because I stood on my own, but because I stood without pretending I had to. Later, alone in my apartment, I thought about contracts and clauses, and how we'd both honored them to the letter. How what emerged beyond them did so only after the terms no longer applied. That timing mattered. It was the difference between taking and choosing. Recovery didn't end when I walked unaided into a room. It ended when I trusted myself to want without needing, and for the first time in a long while, what I wanted didn't scare me. Our relationship didn't announce itself. It settled in quietly, the way something real does when it isn't trying to impress anyone. No grand declarations, no urgency disguised as passion. Just repetition, coffee that turned into dinner, walks that turned into lingering, conversations that stretched until the city lights blurred into something soft and forgiving. What surprised me most was how little I needed to explain myself with her. She knew the version of me that couldn't stand, couldn't rush, couldn't dominate a room with posture alone. That knowledge didn't weaken me, it anchored me. When I walked beside her now, steady and unassisted, I felt no urge to perform resilience. She'd already seen the parts of me that required patience. That changed everything. Work accelerated again, predictably. Meetings returned to glass rooms and sharp voices. The board stopped asking about my recovery and started asking about growth. I answered them without hesitation. Power felt different now, less brittle, less performative. I didn't need to prove I was untouchable. I knew exactly how touch could be earned. Evelyn noticed the change before I did. "You don't brace yourself anymore," she said one night as we cooked together, shoulders brushing easily. "You move like you expect the ground to be there." I smiled. "It usually is." She leaned against the counter, watching me with a familiarity that still startled me sometimes, not possession, recognition. The kind that doesn't rush to define but refuses to look away. When she reached for me, it was unhurried, her hand resting at my waist like a question she already knew the answer to. Intimacy, I learned, isn't about intensity. It's about accuracy, knowing when to step closer and when to leave space. Evelyn had always understood that. Now, without uniforms or obligations between us, that understanding became something we shaped together. Our closeness didn't erase boundaries. It respected them so thoroughly that they no longer felt like barriers. One afternoon, we passed the cafe where we'd first met as ourselves. I hesitated, then laughed at the instinct. "Do you realize that was the first time I'd gone anywhere alone since the accident?" I said. She stopped walking. "You didn't tell me that." "I didn't know how," I admitted. "It felt private." She took my hand then, not to steady me, not to guide, but because she wanted to. The difference mattered. "You were brave long before you stood up," she said. I thought about that later, alone in my office, watching the city pulse beneath me. About how courage had shifted shapes so many times I almost hadn't recognized it. I'd spent years believing independence was the goal. Turns out, interdependence, the choice to let someone see you clearly without handing them control, was far harder and far more rewarding. There were moments of doubt, of course. Old instincts don't vanish quietly. Once, after a long day, I snapped at her over nothing. She didn't withdraw. She didn't appease. She named it, calmly, and waited. That steadiness, the refusal to turn conflict into leverage, felt like trust in action. I apologized without strategizing. Another first. We didn't rush labels. We didn't need them. What we were building didn't feel fragile enough to require constant reassurance. It was strong, because it had been tested by restraint, by ethics, by the choice to wait until waiting was no longer necessary. On a warm evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the city glow, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't afraid of falling anymore, not physically, not emotionally. I knew how to get back up. I knew who would stand beside me, not because she was obligated, but because she wanted to. The chair was gone now, stored away, a chapter closed. But its lessons remained, etched into how I moved through the world, how I chose intimacy, how I understood strength. We build differently when we stop leaning on what once held us up. We build honestly, and what grows from that kind of ground doesn't need support to last. The first time I walked into a room full of investors without thinking about my gait, I didn't notice it until afterward. That felt like progress of the truest kind, the kind that doesn't ask to be witnessed. The city outside the conference room windows looked the same as it always had. Relentless, brilliant, unconcerned. I realized then that recovery hadn't returned me to who I was. It had introduced me to someone quieter, more exact. Evelyn waited for me downstairs that evening, leaning against the hood of my car, coat pulled tight against the cooling air. She looked up when she saw me and smiled. Not impressed, not relieved, just glad. I walked toward her without calculating steps or angles, without rehearsing how I would be perceived. When I reached her, she kissed me once, simple and sure, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. We didn't talk about the accident anymore, not because it was erased, but because it had finally found its place. A chapter, not a definition. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch myself remembering the weight of the chair, the way the world had narrowed. I didn't push those memories away. I let them exist, proof that I had survived something that stripped me down and rebuilt me with intention. One weekend, we visited a quiet coastal town north of the city. No schedules, no obligations, just long walks, salt air, and the steady rhythm of waves undoing urgency. At one point, I slipped slightly on wet sand. Evelyn reached for me without thinking, and I steadied myself just as naturally. We laughed, not nervously, not dramatically. The moment passed. That mattered too. That night, as we sat wrapped in blankets watching the ocean darken, she said, You know what stayed with me the most? I turned toward her. What? The way you let me step back, she said. You didn't cling. You didn't try to keep me where I was useful. You chose yourself, even when it meant risking us. I absorbed that quietly. You gave me space to do that, I said. You never confused care with possession. She nodded. That's how I knew this would be real. Only something chosen freely lasts. In the months that followed, life expanded again, not explosively, but deliberately. We learned each other in ordinary moments. Grocery lists, missed calls, shared silences that didn't ask to be filled. I remained powerful in my work, but the power felt grounded now, less about dominance, more about clarity. I no longer needed to prove I could stand alone to believe I was strong. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd recovered faster, if I'd never needed help at all. The thought no longer scared me. Some lessons require stillness. Some connections only form when control loosens its grip. The contract that brought Evelyn into my life had been specific and binding. It ended cleanly, ethically, exactly as it should have. What followed didn't replace it, it transcended it. Not because rules were broken, but because they were honored long enough to no longer be necessary. One evening, as we walked home beneath a sky bruised with sunset, she reached for my hand. I took it without hesitation. The city moved around us, indifferent and alive. I didn't rush. I didn't brace. After an accident, I had been forced to depend on someone else. What emerged beyond the contract wasn't weakness. It was choice. And choosing, over and over, freely, turned out to be the strongest thing